Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast, and my guest today is Trish Wood. So Trish, welcome to the show.
Really happy to be here. I've been circling you for years and admiring you from afar, so I feel like we should have done this ages ago, but here we are, right?
I feel like we should have too, but you know what? I'm glad to have you on here now, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you more in the future too.
Excellent.
But I didn't really give you much of an introduction there at the start. So for people who don't know who you are, can you tell people just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'll give you the Coles Notes version. I'm kind of a recovering legacy media journalist. I was host of The Fifth Estate for 10 years back when that meant something. They were doing really good work.
And that's for CBC for people who are unaware of that, The Fifth Estate.
Yeah, for international audience, it's like 60 Minutes, or in the UK Panorama, top of the line investigative journalist with a big budget. The kind of shows that actually change policy, right? So I got quite good training there. And I worked at various other news organizations along the way. And then I went after the Iraq War to work in Washington for actually a Nobel Peace Prize winning organization run by a guy named Bobby Mueller, who is a Vietnam veteran, paralyzed in Vietnam, who came back a completely reformed person. So I worked for him for 2 years during the Iraq War and ended up writing a book about insurgency warfare. And then after that, kind of worked a lot as a freelancer in various documentary genres because I was single parenting and I really needed to be able to pick and choose my work. So I did a lot of true crime, which was pretty fun. And my last big project before COVID, my career was just taking off in the big money section again, was a 5-part series for Amazon Studios. So it doesn't get much bigger than that. Big budget. And it's a funny story. I was having
What was that going to be on, the 5-part series?
Ted Bundy, Falling for a Killer. It was a kind of an homage to the Ezra Edelman OJ Made in America, that we were looking through serial killing and Ted Bundy specifically through the lens of gender, right? Because it hit right at the time that women in the early 70s were getting the pill and were going to school, and Mary Tyler Moore was tossing her hat in the air, and then all of a sudden this horrible phenomena shows up. So it was done through that lens. It's quite smart. It was quite an elevated view of true crime. So the day the lockdowns were announced by Tony Fauci in March of 2020, I had been contacted by a really big agent. And once that happens, you start making money from your docs, right? And you work all the time. And he said, Trish, I really want to sign you, but I'm now on my way home to hunker down, and I'll call you when all this is over. And that was like 4.5 years ago, and we never spoke again. And I won't go back to that now anyway. I couldn't go back to that now. So what happened, which brought me to you, is that in the 4 years during COVID, because I had a background in science reporting, which happened in the 80s, specifically covering Tony Fauci.
What topics did you cover on Tony Fauci specifically?
Well, I was covering AIDS, which was his last kind of disaster, right? I have lots of stories about that.
And for people who don't know, though, Trish, I think people would want to know that particular story. So what was the disaster, and what did you cover with Dr. Anthony Fauci and with AIDS?
Sure. So that's what led me to start my podcast anyway. I realized that people were not understanding what was going to happen with COVID and COVID public policy. Right. And that I had limited respect for Tony Fauci. And here's why. He wasn't that different then. He was very, very big on, we're going to solve this with a virus. He was very big on withholding untested drugs against people who, especially the young men who were pushing for them, who really, really wanted them and needed them. Because unlike COVID in young people, AIDS was a death sentence in the early days. I mean, if you got it, you died of either pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, Kaposi sarcoma, or the terrible dementia ones. I mean, if you got it, you died.
Impressive medical terms there, though. I got to say, a lot of doctors wouldn't know that. So just wanted to compliment you there.
Well, I immersed myself in it because it was also a bit of a cultural phenom. Like, it was gay men, which was interesting. They were educated and smart. I was tutored by the AIDS reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, a guy named Randy Schultz, who wrote a book called And the Band Played On, which is a famous, famous book about what they call the plague. So it was a very immersive thing for me, and I cared deeply about it. But anyway, so Fauci was running that show. And I think for me, the biggest story that came out of that time, well, it was two things. It was the empowerment of the patient to demand better stuff from regulators. It was the commitment of the clinicians, the specific doctors dealing with these young men who were dying and how creative they had to be to keep them alive. But it was also Fauci's reluctance to ever kind of move outside his self-imposed guardrails. And one of them was about not prescribing drugs off-label, which of course we saw with ivermectin and the other hydroxychloroquine during COVID. And one of the drugs specifically was called Bactrim, right? It's kind of, it's the same properties as an antibiotic, but I believe it's a sulfur drug or sulfa drug.
It's a sulfa drug, yeah. We use it a lot for like UTIs and things like that. Right.
And they found in kind of anecdotally in clinical practice, it worked really well as a prophylax against a second bout of pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, or PCP, which was a lifesaver. That's what guys were dying of. And the anecdotal data was pretty clear. And so a bunch of the AIDS activists, a guy specifically named Michael Callan, who I knew quite well, he was the longest living AIDS survivor, had it for 11 years before he died, went to visit Tony at the NIH and begged him, because there was no internet, to put out a bulletin saying, yes, you can use this, doctors, it works. And he refused to do it. Refused. And eventually it was cleared for use after he got his controlled studies that he was so rigidly demanding. But I think the number of
just to interrupt, was his reason for not doing it because he wanted more randomized controlled trials?
That's his MO.
And then, but prior to that, what data did you guys have, or did you see that would indicate that this drug should be prescribed prophylactically?
The data was coming from all of these highly, highly motivated and skilled clinicians who'd been throwing anything at this thing to try to slow it down, right? Many of these doctors ended up with PTSD, obviously, because so many of their patients died, but they were finding in their practice. So it was anecdotal, but gathered through a lot of places, that it worked. And the other part of it, as you know, is that it's not a drug that's particularly dangerous, right? I know some people are allergic to it, but
you can be allergic to sulfa drugs, yes.
Yeah, but it's not like taking a chemotherapy or something that can make you sick. So there wasn't really a downside. That was part of it. But he wouldn't budge. And in the meeting with Michael Callan, and I can vouch for this because I interviewed him myself about it in his office at NIH, he just refused to color outside the lines in that way. And there really is if you're looking at illness through a kind of a lens of being humane, there wasn't really a downside for him saying, yeah, sure, go ahead, try it if it's working for you, and putting out a bulletin, he wouldn't do it. So the number is that 17,000 young men, give or take, died waiting for the right approval of that drug over the 2 years that it took. That's a classic Fauci story.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. And I think that we need to, this is my approach, to medicine. I understand when people say that, they want all the randomized control trials to come out. I understand that. I look at randomized control trials, and yes, they are the gold standard of medicine, especially when you pull them together and do a meta-analysis. However, you have to look at the whole situation and then make the best decision. If you're in a situation like you were, where people were dying, and you had, doctors, clinicians saying that giving this drug works, then in a situation like that, I think the risk-benefit ratio, despite not having randomized controlled trials, points towards using the drug. And had that drug been used, then yes, maybe thousands and thousands of men could have been saved. So again, I think that we have to take the whole situation into context. And I don't think people are doing that. They're just going straight to the randomized controlled trials and then making a decision. And I don't think, that's the right method. I think you need to look at the whole context of what's going on. What is the disease? How is it affecting the population? What are clinicians saying? Maybe we don't have the ideal randomized controlled trials, but what is the best data that we have now, and what is the best decision to make on that data that we have now? And it seems like in your situation, they didn't make the best decision, obviously, because if they did, then all those men wouldn't have died. And so, I think that's something in medicine that we need to, discuss a little bit more. Like if something is completely benign, and again, I'm not saying Ceftra's benign. I see people all the time in my office. They say they're allergic to sulfa. They come in for a UTI. I need to, prescribe them something else. But when you're looking at it, something like you die from AIDS, or maybe you get, a side effect from medication, like some nausea or vomiting. I mean, obviously, if it was me and someone says this could, potentially save you, or it could give you, some unpleasant side effects, I'm going to say, well, yeah, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take something that may potentially save my life.
Yeah. You should have been a doctor back then. I bet you would have been a good one, because there was a guy named Joe Sonnabend out of New York who was a very high profile kind of advocacy doctor with a lot of big AIDS patients, kind of outspoken AIDS patients. And that was his paradigm, right? They're dying. At the beginning, I can't even tell you, they all died, right? If your boyfriend had it and then you tested positive for it, there was no doubt you were going to die of AIDS relatively quickly. Not much you could do, probably going to be a horrible death. I mean, it just ripped through the population like wildfire, and nobody really knew what to do about it. It was quite awful. So there were some really good doctors, and we saw this around COVID too. These great clinicians, who were studying ivermectin and stuff, said there's got to be a better way. And just your point about I did stories about thalidomide too, right? Thalidomide didn't save anybody's life. Was it a sleeping pill for pregnant women or a tranquilizer or something? It wasn't a necessary drug, right? So it should have had better testing. They only tested it in rabbits. So when these deformed children started coming, they weren't expecting it. And that's completely wrong. So that's a drug that could have been and should have been tested more thoroughly before it was given, especially to pregnant women, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know all about that disaster, and the, images that you see online are horrific. And yeah, I mean, we need to do, that's a situation obviously where, yeah, there should have been, much more, rigorous testing done. Just coming back again to Anthony Fauci for a second, I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on, maybe you haven't read or maybe you're unaware of it, but Robert Kennedy's junior book, The Real Anthony Fauci, are you familiar with that book, or familiar with some of the findings in it, or what he said?
I've seen bits of it. I purposely didn't read it because I spent 4 years being enraged anyway. And
okay. I understand that. You would have opened the book and then it just would have made you pissed off. So it's like, why am I going to open a book if it's just going to make me angry?
Well, exactly. And I lived it. So it was sort of, I gave some of that. I will read it eventually. But if you step back and just think about what has happened here, this guy has a history of being wrong, and arrogantly wrong, and wrong in a way that kills people. And he manages to surf through this very high tower of science and medicine called the NIH, making a fortune, never being called on the carpet until recently, probably, I think we know, funded the EcoHealth research that led, think of it this way. We just had a pandemic that was being fought by the guy who probably had a hand in creating it anyway. Is that like a true thing? We can say that now?
Sorry, say that again, Trish.
Well, we just had a pandemic, COVID, yeah. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the lead person fighting that virus on our behalf, right? If he funded EcoHealth to do the gain of function, then he sort of created it. So he's fighting it, and he created it, and nobody was really talking about that.
I think, I guess we can't say for certain, that's definitely what happened, but certainly we know that, it has to be at least a hypothesis. It has to be at least be considered. And the fact that people are not even considering that, is ridiculous. And I think very, very naive in my mind.
Yeah. I don't think there's much doubt. I'm pretty convinced that it was a gain of function screw up and that EcoHealth was involved in it. So,
I mean, even if you, like, I'm sure you saw, maybe it was 6 or 9 months ago now, it was Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Makary. I mean, they were on the stand with the Supreme Court, and they just kind of said, like, you know, it's obvious that, like, you know, it came from the lab, you know, and so, you know, it's ridiculous that people didn't consider that as like a theory. And then, you know, I guess, again, you know, we can't say with 100% certainty, but it seems like that would be the most likely thing, you know, by far.
Yeah.
You know, and
Occam's razor. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what, you know, the top level scientists like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Martin Makary, like that's what those guys are saying. And so, you know, the fact that people have, you know, dismissed that is completely ridiculous.
Completely. And do you mind if I ask you a question about it? Because it must be weird having been a doctor and living through this time too. And I will say for me personally, I was always a little bit of a medical groupie. You know, I had doctors way up high, wanted my kid to go into medicine and stuff. And now I have a bit of a different view of it. And I'm wondering how you feel having seen how some sectors of your own profession, how they behave during this. I mean, it must be kind of destabilizing for you in some way.
I think that there's maybe like a disconnection there for sure. Like I think that, you know, in medicine, when you go through medical school in Canada, and, you know, we have amazingly trained doctors and that, you know, but you're certainly forced more to allopathic, traditional, mainstream sort of medicine, right? And I, you know, very, very luckily was, you know, my parents put me in sports when I was super young. And like, I started going to the gym when I was 14. So like, you know, I was like, you know, I could bench press like over 200 pounds when I was like in grade 11, you know, and so like I got into working out like really, really young and, you know, that certainly helped, you know, shape me in a way. But a lot of, you know, doctors didn't have that growing up. You know, they sort of were, you know, I don't want to say, you know, nerds, but, you know, that's like kind of, you know, the typical people that you get in medical school that maybe don't exercise too much and, you know, just kind of focus on books and that kind of thing. And that wasn't me. You know, I always played a lot of hockey and, you know, I'm really big into MMA and that kind of thing. So I live it and breathe it, you know, like, and I want to focus on optimizing health and, you know, nutrition and recovery and sleep and all these things that are sort of, you know, considered to be holistic, you know. So I think that, you know, the type of doctor that you get, a lot of it really depends upon their background and how they kind of, you know, grew up in a certain way. And like, if your doctor looks like, you know, he's in really good shape, he'll probably know a lot about hormones and peptides and, you know, Huberman's podcast and all this kind of stuff.
Peter Attia.
Dr. Peter Attia. But if, you know, they look like they, you know, don't work out, they probably don't listen to Peter Attia. They probably don't listen to Dr. Peter Attia. They probably don't listen to Dr. Andrew Huberman, you know, and I think that the younger generation, and not just the younger generation, everyone is kind of getting, you know, more interested in, you know, alternative sort of medicine. And some of it is because of, you know, the poor public health messaging. I think that's been going on.
Yes. So
it's, you know, so like there's good doctors and bad doctors, just like there's good cops and bad cops, you know, and so, you know, I think that everyone needs to find a doctor that they sort of like fit with, like they could almost like hang out with kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. Well, my guy, who is a young guy, who I was kind of mad about during COVID, actually apologized to me for being carried away with some of the, and I started crying. Like it was, I can't, if there's any doctors listening to this, I cannot express how important it is for you. If you were too COVIDian, to say so to your patients, they will absolutely love you for it. But what I want to say about that, I don't know if you know this or not, but I broke my foot 2 months ago.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't know this.
Yeah, big old
Sorry
Liz Frank injury right across my arch, like a huge, yeah. My dog pulled me over, right? It was like,
okay.
what? So I've been avoiding emergency for years. I didn't go in for a day and a half, if you can believe it. And then my husband got a wheelchair and took me in. And here's what has a really interesting story. So the environment at this major Toronto hospital going into emerge was a nightmare. They had a million signs saying social distancing, wear a mask, you can't bring family members in, and the whole kit and caboodle was behind plexiglass, right? And I'm feeling scared and sad, and there's no one there to say, poor baby, what's wrong, right? And I thought, why are they acting like it's still COVID? And then I got all the COVID questions. And there was a sign on the wall saying something like, if you are mean to our staff, we will call the police, a version of that. Like, don't be mean. Don't like, and like, what about us? So I was very, clicking over in my head what I was going to say in the podcast about it, and had a really big tantrum brewing in my head. And then I met the doctors, and the doctors were fantastic. It's like you go in from the waiting room to the real world, and the doctors kind of had their masks hanging from their ears, and they weren't playing COVID theater. And an older female doctor, whose name I've forgotten, took me into the examining room. Liz Frank is very hard to diagnose, as you might know. It's one of the hardest ones because the foot is not deformed. You can't see it, right? And you can't see it on an x-ray always either. So she made me stand on my foot. I was crying. It hurt so much. She did an x-ray. The x-ray found nothing. And she said, I don't believe this is what's going on. So she sat me back in the wheelchair, gave me a hydromorphone for the pain, and ordered a CAT scan. And the CAT scan came back, and they were like, whoa, this is really serious, right? So props to her. Props to her. And then Dr. Chertoff, who I saw the next day, kind of sorted it out in a more specific way and got me up to the fracture clinic and that. But my point of the story is that the doctors were perfect, right? The environment was shit. It was terrible. I hated it, and I felt dehumanized by it, and could tell it was proscribed by somebody in an office somewhere in the hospital who didn't like human beings very much. So that was a very interesting experience for me.
But it seems like there's a lot of good in what you just said, though, in my opinion, because it seems like overall you still had a pretty good experience.
Excellent.
And
yeah.
That means that, for the doctors out there listening, like if you are in an environment where you don't really like working, you can still make such a big difference. Like you control your actions all the time. You control how you speak to patients. You control, the tests that you order, the drugs that you give, all that kind of stuff. So you can still be, you still have so much control, even though, the environment may not be ideal. And so I think that, for people who don't like going to, urgent care and walk-in clinics, and even the walk-in clinic I work at, I totally get it. Like, I go there and there's 20 people literally like waiting outside the door before I come in the morning. And then I'll walk in and they come in, and yeah, there's people there. They got to wait, 1 to 2 hours. Unfortunately, that's our system. But I know that each time there, I'm making some kind of difference. So like, even though that person had to, wait outside before, and they had to wait in the waiting area, and maybe someone in the waiting area was being kind of loud, and maybe there was a baby screaming there, I know that once they get into my room, I can still look in their throat, see pus, give them a prescription, and make them feel better. And, so, that's the most important part is for, doctors, I think, to focus on, what they can control, and not focus on what they can't control. And they can always control, how they treat the patients, what medicine they use, how they diagnose, all that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate you sharing that story.
Yeah, and I think now it's even more important because we've come out of a 4-year period where a lot of people felt dehumanized by the system more generally, right? It was, we would hear the public health people saying, we have to lock down the schools more, or we have to do another lockdown, or we're going to mandate this or that. And there was never, to use a phrase you used earlier, there was never a risk-benefit ratio. It was like everything was in service of suppressing COVID. Even if 9 million people died from the policy, we're suppressing the virus. So that's very dehumanizing, right? And so now in medical school, talking to the graduating class or whatever you call it in medical school, I would say that the biggest goal now is for doctors in the human interface to really, really get back that trust again. Like even the touch of a hand from a doctor is world changing for people when they're scared, right? And we got to get back to that. The doctors have to get back to that again, where we can start worshiping you again. Like we used to.
No, I get it. Like we're kind of, America's most wanted right now. Like I felt like in the past, it's always been like, people hate on cops. Ice Cube's got his, famous song, "Fuck the Police."
Yeah.
But like now it's like, the doctors, right?
Isn't that Diddy now? That's probably Diddy's song now, right? He's in a lot of trouble.
Man, that is wild. I'm never
wild.
playing any Diddy again, but there's always something about him that I always felt like he had an anger streak in him. He doesn't seem like a fun guy to be around.
No.
Seems like he always needs to be in charge, always has to have be in power, I don't think that guy can chill out. I wouldn't want to hang out with him.
Yeah, no, he's a very, very bad guy. And I'm starting to think back now. My oldest boy listened to a lot of hip hop music, right? And some of it's quite fun. I quite like Drake at times and various other people, but some of the language is so dehumanizing of women. I thought, is there a connection between Diddy's behavior and the stuff they say about women being hoes and all the other stuff they say? I mean, I think there is. And now I'm thinking why did I let my kids listen to that? That was so bad.
I think that they listen to it because, well, first of all, I'll be honest, I'm 39, almost 40 years old, and I still listen to a lot of
my son's 40. He's like you. Yeah.
And I still listen to it, all the time. One thing I'll say about it is it's mostly, you can definitely say it's a little bit shallow, but it's for the most part a little bit uplifting and positive. There's I think that, if you look at today's world, I think that a lot of parents wouldn't really mind, if their kids were sort of into I guess it's money and girls in a way, as opposed to so much of the nonsense it's going on now in universities and the wokeness and stuff like that. I get that, you don't want your child to treat women poorly and use all this language that they use in some of the songs and some of that kind of stuff too, but I think overall it's still a more of a uplifting genre of music, and I think that for men it's almost like an antidepressant. It gives them that little sense of
see that. Yep.
Of power,
Yeah.
And and it's great for working out. It's great for playing in the car. It's guys like to, feel like the man, so to speak. You know what I mean? And then you put on some music that you really like, and you jam out to it. You just kind of get that feeling. And I think that with hip hop and with, men, but women too, it gives them that kind of feeling that they're sort of looking for.
Yeah. Well, look at young men, especially your generation of men, got really kind of whacked upside the head, didn't they? In a post-feminist generation. There's lots of guys sitting around their parents' basement in hoodies, not going anywhere and feeling completely kind of masculinized, is that a word? So I get it totally. I actually do understand what you're saying. It's been
why do you think that is, though? Why do you think there's so many young people that are men in particular that sort of feel they're, if that is a word, demasculinized?
Well, I'm going to say this, nobody's ever going to speak to me again, but I do feel it is an offshoot of the feminist movement. And listen, I am a card-carrying member because of my age. I would go out on shoots with male crews, and it was sort of a nightmare, and they treated us like the secretaries, and it was awful. But we go on. what's the British, keep calm and carry on, or get on with it, right? So I was never militant. I just recognized we were getting screwed over and did my job better than anybody. But I felt that later the messaging toward men was pretty debilitating, right? There was a period of time when we said they were all rapists and they were all doing these sort of terrible things and had no value and that. And I feel like that was absorbed from the culture into young men. I mean, I was careful not to do it with my kids, but I was a single mother, so they didn't really have, well, I guess they saw their dads too, but they didn't have a kind of a live-in male influence in their lives, right? So I think that's also part of it. It's difficult. But I also think, and this is up your alley, I think it's the food they're eating too. I think that their testosterone, if you tested all these kids, what are their testosterone levels when they're eating Pop-Tarts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which they are, right?
I will say that, I have tested, not many, because it's not really something that's indicated and a lot of people don't ask for it, but I have tested men even in their, early 20s for their testosterone. And sometimes it comes back like pretty low, and, yeah, I mean, that's really, really unfortunate. And, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that testosterone levels have significantly declined, meaning that the average testosterone of a man, in his 30s or 40s in the 1970s is significantly higher than the average man's testosterone in the 30s or 40s in 2024. And yeah, I think, food is definitely part of it. I know BPA for sure. For everyone listening, this actually is stainless steel, so I don't drink out of plastic.
So what is BPA? By what?
Biphosphorenol A. So they think that's an endocrine disruptor, so something that could again lower testosterone, increase estrogen, these kind of things. And the other thing, a lot of people are unaware of this, but so adipose tissue or fat tissue has an enzyme called aromatase. So when you have more fat tissue, what happens is your testosterone gets converted to estrogen because aromatase converts testosterone to estrogen. So guys who are really, really obese, they generally have low testosterone. And it's a little bit of a cyclical thing that you can't really get out of, because you have low testosterone and then you don't have any motivation, so you don't go to the gym. But then all these guys who have high testosterone, they're going to the gym all the time. That's keeping their testosterone higher too, because they're lifting heavy weights, and so they're motivated, and so their testosterone stays high. So it is a little bit difficult to get out of that low T cycle.
And it affects how you think about yourself too, right? I love lifting. My younger son's a personal trainer, so he's got me doing a bit of lifting at the club where he's a trainer, and I love it. It's like doing drugs. It's so great. But the other part of this equation is, I think it's screens. I think, all these young men who are kind of blobbed out, maybe a better word, in the basement, low testosterone, they're all gaming the whole time. I had my two kids over. They came to see Mom with the broken foot, and we were watching the basketball game on Sunday afternoon together. And I looked up at one point, nobody was watching the game. Everybody was on their phone, right? And I'm like, guys, do we have to have a lockbox when you come into Mom's house now so that you pay attention to me here? I sound like some old woman making you feel guilty about paying attention. But aside from paying attention, why are they on their phones all the time? That also rewires the brain. I think it does at your endocrine system. It does terrible things. Get your kids off their phones. Get them a flip phone. They don't need smartphones. Get them a little flip phone, right?
And what you just said too, though, is so important, because you're bringing awareness to it. People aren't aware of that. If you didn't make that comment, no one else in the room would have said hey guys, all five of us are looking at our phones, So, I think that I think it's, I don't want to say call out, but make people aware of it. Tell people to get off their phone and that kind of thing, and I think there should be some rules. When I go out to dinner with my fiance, I just put my phone on the table and that's it. That's a rule that I have when I'm at dinner,
So if somebody says, okay, what was Kevin Spacey's last movie? Do you Google it on your phone at dinner, or do you keep your phone?
I'm brutal for that. So because of that, I've made this rule because I would do that. Or like some of my friends would ask about a hockey stat or something like that. And then all of a sudden you got to, break it out and see, oh, did that person really score 50 goals that season? So, it's something that I've made aware of myself. And so when I'm out for dinner, it's sort of like, a rule that I try to, stick to.
Here's a guy you should have on the show who I had on mine. His name is Michael Niels. And I think it's Michael Niels who says this. And he says that because we are outsourcing our actual memory to an exterior hard drive, meaning our phones and the Google search, right? That our actual memory capacity is atrophying. And I 1,000% believe that is true. Because my first response now, shamefully, is to Google something. I don't even spend a second trying to think what it is. I'm instantly Googling. And he says that our amygdala is changing, that all of these interactions with screens and habits and all of these things, they change our brain chemistry. They literally are changing the shape of our brain. They affect our memory, our ability to even just function in the world. I think he's completely right. You should have him on. He's an amazing guest.
I think he's right too. And I need to learn a little bit more about dopamine. I know quite a bit about it, but there's a woman, Dr. Anna Lemke. She's got a book called Dopamine Nation. She's actually probably a really good guest for you. She's been on Rogan. She's been on Huberman. She's fantastic. But yeah, I think that, the phone is definitely messing up with our neurotransmitters, like dopamine and serotonin. And we're just looking for that next click, looking for that next opening our phone, hoping that there's, something there that's going to, grab our attention. People scroll and they don't really realize, I think, that they're scrolling, and how many hours a day do you spend scrolling? It's absolutely wild, so, and it dictates your decisions. You see something online and then you want to talk to someone about it. And then you end up, having a conversation about something that you probably wouldn't have had if you didn't look at your phone. It just changes people's lives so much, from day to day.
Yeah. Well, and I just what we were talking about before we started rolling, I won't mention the name of the person, but I got into a bit of a minor flame war yesterday with a really high profile person who I actually admire. And he'd tweeted something I profoundly disagree with and actually thought was beneath him. I wish he'd taken more time, and I made a snark remark, not a ugly or horrible mean, just snark. And he blocked me. And so then I was tweeting about how he blocked me, which was kind of made me sad about it. And at the end and then everybody was like, oh, that's terrible. I thought, why are we even having this discussion? I'd much rather that because I have this guy's email. I could have just emailed him in repose and said, can we talk about your views on this topic? Because I really think you're wrong. And maybe would you rethink them? But I didn't do that. I did a public instantaneous response, and it's not natural, and it doesn't do anything to really change anybody's opinion, right? My new phrase is truth over tribe. That's my new phrase, because if you're,
I like that.
Thank you. It's
beautiful.
Yeah, it's very important because I was a liberal until 2016 and the Russia hoax story about Trump. And I thought, oh God. And so then with COVID and that, I went from being quite far left to more of a libertarian / conservative, and then Israel, Gaza, which we're not going to talk about, but I feel very strongly, because I covered the region, that the Israeli operations are not defensible anymore. That's my feeling. And so that is not a conservative position, right? So I'm one of those weird people who is trying to straddle two tribes. Wasn't it Frankie Goes to Hollywood, right? Two tribes. Was that Frankie? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so my conservative listeners and readers of my Substack, some of them are really mad. Many have peeled off. It's cost me a fair amount of money in support. But I won't back down just because I'm ornery that way. And I also feel Mike, that if I can't be honest in indie media, especially if what I'm doing is bringing forward talking points that are backed by expertise, information, research. I'm not just hot taking stuff. I'm actually like deeply researching ideas and putting it out there, but people are responding in a visceral way like they've been punched in the nose. How can you defend that? And I think like, okay, wow. So my commitment is to truth, or what I perceive as getting to truth, whether it violates what my readers and listeners are feeling politically that day or not, which one would hope can be respected. And it is deeply respected by some people who are still with me, but others have just fled in droves. And I've been actually picked on, I've been picked on unmercifully for months over it now, actually, since like October 10th.
Wow. Yeah. I understand where you're coming from, because I was on Rogan because I prescribe cannabis, right? And I'm also really big into psychedelics. I'm a big believer in those things. Now, I'm also, though, I love Jocko Willink. I love David Goggins. Yeah. I love working out. I love MMA. I love like that hard sort of like lifestyle. Like do better,
do hard things, make yourself, all that stuff. Yeah.
Like I love that.
Me too.
And those two worlds completely clash. Like they have come together in some ways.
What, the cannabis and the super healthy guys? Like, is that what you're?
Yeah. Like in a way, like cannabis and psychedelics has always been more of like a left wing, like hippie kind of thing. Whereas like the, hardcore, like, militant like Jocko Willink, David Goggins is more on like, the center right, more on the right kind of thing. Like they're not really people that necessarily like hang out together. Like the guys who, got stoned in high school don't usually hang out with the guys who go to military. I mean, sometimes they do.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's like the Navy SEAL guys on the Jocko side versus the stoners on the, Yeah. And so, but my thing with that is like, it's all nonsense. Like I'm just looking for the thing that, jives with me the most, and also that works the best, and that's associated with the best outcomes. I've been trying to think about this lately, and you were saying, truth over tribe. And I'm saying like, like right versus left. Like I'm just saying like, evaluate the data and associate yourself with the best outcome, the best decision for the entire population. And so that's what I think that, we should be doing. Like I follow Jocko Willink and, Martyr Maid.
I don't know. Cameron Haynes, you say?
Martyr Maid does a show with Jocko. He's the other guy who's on he's a former, some type of soldier of some kind, and writes a really, really good Twitter account, actually. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, like
Daryl Cooper, I think his name, Daryl something. Yeah.
There's the other guy was, I forget the other guy's name that he had on. Good Evening Charles, was it? He used to say. I forget. Yeah, Echo Charles, I think was the guy that he had on. But anyway, it's like, I look at those two things just because like I think that there is a lot of validity to, what Jocko's saying, what Goggins is saying. Like discipline is amazing. Like consistency is king for everything. And Ryan Holiday, who I, really like a lot, he's a Stoic writer. He says like, uninterrupted blocks of hard work and time, that's what really propels you, in any kind of field. Yeah. And I really, really believe that.
True.
I really believe in hard work and concentration and, believing in yourself and generating evidence for that. But at the same time too, I also believe that there's a lot of good research on psychedelics. I think that, some people who, have used other medicines, and again, I'm not like anti-pharmaceutical, obviously, but, haven't gotten the same relief that they've gotten from psychedelic medicines. Like there are a lot of people who will tell you that they've done better either microdosing or macrodosing.
Yes, I've heard this. Yes.
With psilocybin mushrooms than they did with, SSRIs or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are the classic, antidepressants that we prescribe. And so, again, that's a left sort of wing view when I say that, traditionally is a left wing view when I think that, cannabis can be helpful again in low doses. I'm not talking about, smoking it all the time, high THC. That's not going to do you any good. But like for some people who are, sort of really, type A, very, very driven, they go crazy all day, and then maybe a little bit of CBD and THC at the end of the day helps them kind of, relax and put them to sleep. Like that kind of thing, like using it as medicine, not using it to like, get high type of say, even though, again, as a libertarian kind of view, like I think you should still be able to use it recreationally if you want to. But, I do think that the view that I have of on cannabis and psychedelics is traditionally more of a left view, whereas, the view I have on Jocko and Goggins is more of a right view. But I don't view it like that. I just like, these are the best two things that work for me in my life,
So was there pushback against you for not appearing to stay in a certain political lane or a certain cultural lane?
I mean, I think that in general, a lot of doctors are more on the left side, like very, very, very much.
Yeah.
And so that sort of breathes through in medicine, and which is, a little bit unfortunate because again, we're not looking at left and right. We're looking at, the best outcome. And so, that to me is a little bit disappointing. And, medicine I know is politicized and it's always been politicized, but like it shouldn't. And like, it doesn't have to be, and I think we need to work on that.
Well, that's so interesting that you said that because what I discovered a couple of years ago was that one of the reasons people are divided is because we're getting our information from different places, right? So someone who watches Fox News, say, versus somebody who watches MSNBC, they live in completely different worlds. Their worlds are shaped by the information they consume, and one person believes one reality and one person believes the other reality, and they can't meet each other. It was like during COVID. If you were like super COVIDian and somebody else wasn't, like you couldn't even have a conversation. And I believe, just getting back to technology and what I believe to be true about phones and screens, is that our ability to tolerate nuance and long form reading and book reading and things that require attention and deep thought is being diminished minute by minute in the world we live in right now. So if you combine all these things together, the kind of growing tribalism, the siloed media consumption, and the idea that our brains are no longer capable of looking at a person and saying, oh boy, that guy feels that way about this certain thing and we disagree, so I don't want to even know from him. That's kind of what's happening because we're not able to engage with someone we don't agree with. This is all happening on a whole bunch of fronts to us right now. And I think it's really, really dangerous. People have said things to me, long-term followers of mine have said things to me in my Substack comments that made me cry. They were so mean to me because I said I think bombing children in Gaza is wrong, right?
Yeah, that's a very, very, nuanced subject. And, I don't think that people should be, I just don't understand how someone can like follow someone for, in a decade, or maybe it was longer for this particular person. And then, there's one thing that they disagree with. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like this person's terrible now. Like that is so wild. Like I just brought up, Ryan Holiday. Ryan has a very, very different view.
I don't know who that is, Mike.
So he is a guy who is, he's kind of popularized Stoicism. His big thing is the Daily Stoic. Have you ever heard of the Daily Stoic? So it's Stoicism obviously is, Marcus Aurelius' teachings and that kind of thing. So he's kind of made like Meditations, which is Marcus's book, like very, very popular. He's written a lot of incredible books. He was mentored by Robert Greene. I don't know if you know Robert Greene. He wrote the 48 Laws of Power. Okay. So, anyways, I think Ryan's amazing. He has the best books. I've already pre-ordered his new book that's coming out soon. During COVID, he was sort of, big on, basically all of the COVIDian policies, you could sort of say, right? And that doesn't mean that Ryan's books still can't help me, or that some of other Ryan's advice still can't help me. It can. It's so, I just think it's ridiculous when people just kind of like dismiss someone like that, and I'm sorry that happened to you, but, hopefully, people, change their behavior in the future.
Well, everybody's mad at me now. So left, right, middle, everybody's mad. So I just have to
I'm on your side, Trish. I'm on your side.
Thank you, Mike. You're very kind. Yeah. But I do feel that everything you just described about this Ryan Holiday person and how people are perceived based on other beliefs is that there is a move afoot coming from, I think, multiple directions, that we are being encouraged to dehumanize one another, right? Whether it's through technology, screens, our informational consumption, talking points that ridicule, all those kinds of things we're being encouraged to dehumanize. I mean, in the olden days when I was growing up, my mother was very far left, probably a socialist. My father owned a trucking company, pretty far right. And they voted, their votes always canceled each other out, and we would argue at dinner, and nobody thought the other person was a bad person. Like, it was just sort of, we knew it was politics, right? Now, can you imagine that even happening in a family? It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, no, it's wild. And, unfortunately, it was only one person, but I did lose one friend over COVID.
Did you? What happened?
Yeah, it was wild. And it was all like, online, and I won't say, the person's name, but like I still visit their website all the time. And I think they put out some great work. But essentially, when, Maxime Bernier for, a short period of time was kind of saying some things that I agreed with,
yeah.
And,
yes, you did.
And, and again, I don't agree with everything that, Max says, and, by any means, but, are there some things I agree with him on? Yeah, for sure. Right. And so I think I had retweeted him maybe a couple times, and he had just thought that I was like associating myself with like a racist party and this kind of thing. And, he's, not a white person. So, he may have just taken that as, an offense. And then, eventually we just kind of, the friendship just kind of ended. He kind of blocked me from everything. And we haven't talked since. So that's it, But, yeah, I mean, it's wild how, and I'm not saying we were like best friends. We definitely, I thought had a lot of respect for each other. We, went to a conference together, and, we hung out a little bit. And so, yeah, it was a little bit disappointing, and it's too bad that things like that happen, and they shouldn't be happening. It should be like what happens, like you described in your family situation. Someone can have, one opinion, someone can have a different opinion, and at the end of the day, they can still be friends, and they can still help each other.
Yeah, well, I think it comes in part from our political culture being so dysfunctional right now, too. Americans specifically, but Canada's not that much better. Do you cold plunge?
So I don't have a cold plunge, but I do the cold showers. But it's something that I, am interested in definitely getting and doing, though, for sure.
My son does. He found a place in Yorkville that you pay and go and hang out and do the cold plunge thing. And he says it's been fantastic for his mood. It's really done that for him.
I mean, I know for sure that it gives you a pretty generous rise in your dopamine for about 2.5 to 6 hours. And so, that's gigantic. Like, I think it's even like 200%, right? So, I'm not saying like you do it once and then, everything's done, but it does give you a boost. And then the other thing it does is that it kind of like builds resilience in you, and like bringing up Jocko again and Huberman, ironically, they did a podcast together recently, and Huberman was talking about there's a part in your brain called your angular singular cortex that actually gets bigger when you do things that you don't want to do. And so, when you do things that you don't want to do, when you voluntarily do it, Jordan Peterson talked about that, like voluntarily doing things instead of embracing for a catastrophe kind of thing. When you're voluntarily doing it, I think that it makes you more resilient and it makes you stronger. And so, I'm not saying there's like a bunch of meta-analysis or, PubMed studies that say that, cold plunging, alleviates depression or that kind of thing. But when someone tells me that, their son's doing cold plunging and they feel way better, why wouldn't I believe them when there, is a body of research that indicates that there's at least some benefit to it. And many other people are saying the same thing.
Yeah. Catherine Austin Fitz sent me a Wim Hof book a couple of years ago because I'd complained to her about something was wrong. I can't remember what it was, but she said, this will sort it out. You've got to, start taking these baths. So I took a couple of ice baths, but I never really got the hang of it. I'm going to keep trying. I found it unbearable. I did.
Yeah. What about sauna?
I love sauna. I'm Finnish. I love sauna. Okay. It's in my family. Okay. Yeah, we do that. Yeah.
So I've never done this, but would be the reason why I maybe would get a cold plunge. I think it would be a lot easier. I mean, obviously it would be a lot easier to do the cold plunge after you've done the sauna.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, that would be my, just getting in straight cold. That's brutal, but
I'm afraid I'm going to have a heart attack or something,
But if I do the sauna and then I get a super cold shower after, it just makes it way easier. That being said, sometimes I still do suck it up and do the cold water thing in the morning too. But I only do it for about 30 to 90 seconds. I don't do 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think if I was rich, I would do like Jack Dorsey lived that way, right? He had a cold plunge in his house and he fasted. He was doing 1 meal per day only. He walked 5 miles to work. He was doing all that stuff. Now, he always looked pretty miserable to me, actually, as a human, but he was thin, right? He was quite thin. And I do believe that the cold thing, I covered the Exxon Valdez oil spill in Alaska for CBC when it happened. It's a terrible story. And I went up there without the right clothes. I was in radio, so I was by myself. And so I ended up out on boats in the freezing cold Prince William Sound, overnight sometimes, trying to get near to things we needed to be talking about. And I remember I was there for a month, and when I got back, I was thin. I lost a lot of weight without trying. And I think it was because I was cold all the time. So when years later I heard, the cold plunge, you'll lose weight, I thought that makes sense because I lived it, right?
Yeah, I would say that, it all, for me, I believe a lot in, CICO, calories in, calories out kind of thing. And so, anytime you're constantly shivering, then you are, giving off more energy. And I think, Huberman used to say that if you are cold and you shiver, that's better for your speeding up your metabolism. But if you don't shiver, that's better for increasing your mental fortitude. So
that's interesting. So shivering is kind of like surrender, and not shivering is, that's really interesting. Yeah.
But that being said too, I just want to make one point there, because you said, Jack Kruse didn't seem like, the most likable, or
happy.
the most happy guy.
Yeah.
I get that. And I want to make that point too, again, about, I brought up the angular singular cortex there. I definitely don't want to have a life where I'm only doing things that I don't want to do. I mean, that sounds horrible and terrible, right? But I also too want to be able to know that I can, do something that I don't want to do if I, have to. And I think that the only way that you can know that is unfortunately by doing, really hard things. So it's basically, what do you do with that? You do, a small amount or a necessary amount of, really hard things that sort of keeps you hard, but also, that makes your life still enjoyable, because, I like to enjoy life. I like to go on vacations. I like to see my friends. I like to have fun, and so I definitely don't spend my life, just doing things that I don't want to do. And I want to have a podcast with you right now, which I'm doing. So, it's, I'm definitely not doing, things that I don't want to do all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I learned a lesson from my broken foot, because I think the 4 years of COVID for a lot of people were about comfort-seeking behavior. Somebody said, okay, comfort-seeking behavior is fine. You can stay on the couch and watch Netflix and order Uber Eats and just do that all day for 4 years or 3 years, whatever it was, and it'll be good. And I think there's a part of everyone that just wants to kind of surrender to that, just like, which is so terrible. We have to fight again. I'm a recovering alcoholic, 24 years. So we have to fight against that, because comfort-seeking behavior is very much part of the addict's personality. So when I broke my foot, I got to do that again. I couldn't walk. So my wonderful husband had to bring me stuff and walk the dog. And I was able to justify ordering DoorDash, which is ridiculously expensive, but I had to do it. And for a couple of weeks, I thought, oh yeah, this is kind of cool. But after a month, I was ready to, my mental health started to really kind of crater and I wasn't doing very well. But
let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you go on vacation, how many days is it before you're like, oh shit, I need to do something productive? Or can you take 2 weeks off or a month off or a week off?
Oh, maybe 2 days. You know why? Because in this world of mine where I'm writing and podcasting and researching, it's kind of 7 days a week. So I'm out of the habit of turning it off. And also because the information flow that happens every day also influences how I think and what I write about and that. So I'm afraid to turn it off. Now, that's a bullshit answer because what I'm really doing is justifying workaholism right now. That's what I'm doing. I understand that. But my husband is also that. So we've cleared the runway for both of us to work too hard. And that's kind of what we do. So when I'm on holiday, mostly at the cottage we go to, I'm going again this year in July for 2 weeks. It's so brilliant on Lake Erie. I get buzzy if I'm not, I get that kind of oh, I need to be online looking for a new story or figuring who my guest is going to be,
Yeah. For me, I can usually do about 4 or 5 days. And then after
that's pretty good. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, even in those 4 or 5 days, I'll still, connect through email and through, Twitter on a couple things maybe, but I'm not, I'm not actively working per se. And then one thing too that, I do, and a lot of people hate this kind of vacation, and I got a feeling that you're going to be one of these people, but I don't mind actually going on all-inclusives. And the reason being,
I would do that.
Oh, you do?
I
because
would, yeah.
The reason being because there's no decisions when I get there, and so I like that. So it gives my brain, a big break on making decisions. Like Steve Jobs always talked about decision fatigue. And, it seems like we have more and more decisions to make in today's fast-paced society. And that's that's what really drains our energy and drains our brain. It's kind of making all these decisions.
Yes. And I feel that's actually so smart because hoarding is kind of it's the opposite of that, right? People who hoard, or what do they call it? Hoarding disorder now or something, do it because they can't make a decision. And I find I tend to be on the clutter side. I'm not a hoarder, but it's really hard for me to throw things away. It's really hard. And the fact of the matter is when I do throw stuff away, a week later, it turns out I needed it, right? I'll throw out the knee scooter I had for my broken foot, and 2 weeks from now, my best friend will break her foot or something. That always happens. But for me, it's the decision to get rid of things that's hard. And I think it's true. The other thing that I find tiresome, we're redecorating the back part of the apartment. And as much as I love interior design and care deeply about my environment, the decision making around it is exhausting. Which color are we doing in the trim? Is it this one or that? And I'm just
Yeah, it's just kind of annoying, It just makes your brain fuzzy and irritable.
Yeah, and that makes me sound like a total ass who's really privileged and doesn't appreciate how lucky I am that I can read. Please don't think of me that way. That's just my life right now. It's actually cheering me up that I can put wallpaper in my bedroom that's got squirrels and little robins on it. That will cheer me up every day.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So I know we only have about 5 or 10 minutes left, and I just wanted to ask you quickly about, the transition from like you're in legacy media and now you're not in legacy media.
Yeah.
And like, what are your views on legacy media now? And like, do you think they're going to stick around? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
I think it's dying, and I think it's committing suicide. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. One of them is the journalism schools that have been captured by postmodern foolishness. The idea that truth itself is not a goal to be objectively sought. They actually literally don't feel that way anymore. And certainly in this country, the way they treated our beloved truckers, the lies they told night after night, I mean, it just made me sick to my stomach. And I'll say something like, I'm not objective about the truckers really. And I state that I should be more than I am, but I got to know Tamara and Chris really well right from before they got there. And I was on the phone with them every day saying, they're accusing you of stealing money. Please explain to me what's happening with the GoFundMe page. And they always had the answers, and they always had the document. Like they are the real deal. So to watch people who stood up at a time in this country when we were all feeling, not all, but those of us who were awake, were all feeling like it was the end of the world, to smear them the way that legacy media did. I mean, every single lie about them was exposed at the POEC, that commission. So there was no Proud Boy money coming in. There was no arson. Nobody was raped. I mean, it was all lies, right? So that is a way in which the legacy media completely debased itself in the eyes of a population that could have used a bulwark between the citizenry and the government. So do I think it can last? I think were it just at the mercy of public taste, it probably wouldn't. But I also feel that there are so many corrupt institutions right now trying to keep it alive with all of these various, free speech bills and going after podcaster bills and special funds for journal. I think they're trying very hard to keep it alive. So we will see. But I will also say this, and people are not going to like it. I'm as worried about indie media right now as I am about legacy media for different reasons. But indie media runs on money still, and I believe that there are a lot of big podcasts and websites right now who are making a ton of money and aren't being honest about what's happening in the world. I think people...
Sometimes they advertise like false supplements and stuff like that too. I just want to throw that out there,
I know, right? And I know that the other thing that's happened, and I want people to really understand this, that information has become a very cheap commodity. People expect it for free now. They don't want to pay to listen to podcasters and join Substacks that they read. They don't want to. There's too many people giving it away for free, myself included. I asked for support, but I don't. Only a few pieces have I ever put a paywall up. So that has also cheapened the arena. And then the other thing I would say, just to throw into the mix here for people to think about, is putting together 4 guys who have opinions on a topic is not informing the public, right? So if you don't, if you want to know about something, there are experts on things. Like, I know we all hate experts now because of COVID and they made fools out of themselves. But there are experts on various subjects that the public needs to hear from so that they can have an informed decision. Or I can listen to PBD. I think they're quite fun. But there's a whole bunch of stuff they don't know anything about. And it just becomes that you're tuning in because they're rage farming. People are yelling at each other. People are debating. And people, I think they don't understand, the audience doesn't understand that the arguing and the rage farming, it releases dopamine in your brain. And then that's what they're going for. They want your clicks. They don't care if you fully understand the topic. They just want you watching that show so that they can monetize. They just want
your attention.
Exactly.
They want your attention. They're doing whatever they can to get your attention.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So what's happening now in indie media in its own way is bad. And oddly, for the same reason, like if you are trying to monetize through, like you said, supplements or something else, there's a moral problem with some of that stuff. Or if you're doing a subscription model, which I have done, I lost about half of my viewers because I was drawing on my reportage from the Middle East when I weighed in on October 13th about the false and now thoroughly debunked beheaded baby story, right? People were angry about that. And so I don't know where you go from there. If you can't monetize through advertising and your readers only want you to feed their confirmation bias in order for them to support you and think you have value, that is also not going to work. So then where do we go from here? I don't have an answer, but I do know where we need to get to, and that is we have to get to a place where there are platforms that have a multitude of approaches to a story. And I don't mean, we'll do conservative on this page and left wing on that. I mean, there is an objective truth that transcends political parties, right? There has to be some kind of a website or podcast or something that is able to bring people trustworthy, objective truths that they can hang their hat on. And there's Glenn Greenwald and people who I admire, people like that. Matt Taibbi, I deeply admire, but not too many.
Yeah, it's definitely an odd time, but I think one important point you really made there, though, kind of at the beginning, was that, sure, it's good to be critical and not trust legacy media. Not that, every single legacy media story is incorrect, but it's good to be critical of them. But it's also you have to have the same level of criticism when you're also reading indie journalism, right? So you have to bring the same level of criticism to both.
Yes, exactly. And here's the other thing I would say before we go. So let's say Gaza for a minute, which I'm not going to belabor, but the left-wing, quasi-left-wing media got Gaza more right than conservative media did, purely on a factual basis. And, Israel was not letting news media into Gaza. The only media there were already there. They were reporting for Al Jazeera mostly. Many of them are dead now, right? But so when it happened, I started going more to places that had people or did have people in that place, right? So it was Channel 4 out of the UK, Al Jazeera out of Qatar, which is a place that I don't always watch or agree with, right? But on the foreign policy stuff about the Middle East, they're actually better than legacy media, who don't tend to have people there, who don't hire journalists who have a lot of foreign policy experience, and who tend to just kind of parrot the talking points of whatever the kind of neocon operators in government are saying that day. So I took I'd never listened to Channel 4 on some of the trans stuff or some of the other culture war. I just wouldn't, or the kind of anti-racist stuff, the more crazy stuff. I wouldn't. But on this, they have been right. So how hard is that? I can do it. I'm a legacy journalist. I know how to kind of weigh, they're right on this based on stuff I know or books I've read or reputations I know about. But the poor people out there, they're like, what? Now you're telling me to watch the BBC? They're stupid. It's really hard.
I know. I get it. And again, that just comes down to being critical. And then again, another important point is each source, like we're saying to people, people are saying, well, tell me what sources are, good. We can give you sources that are, likely to be good all the time, but I can't give you a source that's going to be 100% correct every single time, which means you have to learn how to think critically, right? Definitely by going to certain people like Glenn Greenwald or Matt Taibbi, you're gonna have more likely of a chance where you're not gonna have to push back sort of thing. But still you need to think critical. I know we're running out of time, and I just want to ask you before we left, so I'm a newfie, if you had any words on Rex Murphy, because I know that he just passed recently from CBC. You are part of CBC, and just wanted to know if you just had any words about that.
Well, this is what I would say about Rex and people from Newfoundland more generally. And I used to say this when I was on the road for CBC and had the privilege of reporting on something from Newfoundland. They were and are, and he personified the idea that, to me, the most kind of civilized people in this country. There is a decorum, a politeness, a manners, an attitude in Newfoundland that is found I think, nowhere else in the country. And I think that he exuded that in his whole persona, but also in his writing. Even when he was being ornery and feisty, there was an elegance and a civility about his writing that really, in my view, captured the kind of psychic essence of Newfoundland.
Yeah, no, he was an amazing man. I only got to speak to him on the phone once. Never got to meet him in person, but he represented Newfoundland really, really well. And I really appreciate all the kind words that you said about Newfoundland and the people. And yeah, I mean, people always find it kind of strange, like that all my friends, I still have, even from like preschool, and like high school, like junior high, elementary school, like we're all still in touch.
Really?
It's a very,
wow.
Yeah, very, very special place and special friendships.
Well, I want to go to Fogo Island before I die, but
yeah, well, I've never been there actually, so I need to do that before I die too.
$2,000 a night or something.
I know, right? I know, it's wild.
But I saw a story on her, and I worship her because she took her big high-tech money, her millions, and brought it back into a community and did a really beautiful thing with it. So we have to cheer for that, even if we can't afford it, right?
Absolutely. Well, Trish, you've been an amazing guest, but please let people know about your podcast, your Twitter handle, and all that before we say goodbye.
So the podcast is Trish Wood is Critical, and I've reverted away from video for a while. I'm just doing audio only because I had as I said, a broken foot and a bunch of other stuff, so I wanted to keep it simple. And that is on all the platforms, Spotify and iTunes and all of those places. It drops on Friday night. It's long form. It's kind of, if Joe Rogan were your mother and a journalist, maybe that's kind of how you would describe it. I have a lot of time for Joe Rogan, by the way, which might surprise you, but I do. I think he's a curious person, and curiosity will save us, right, at the end of the day. And I write a Substack, which is more kind of serious journalism and commentary. And I have a handle on Twitter where I'm getting in a lot of trouble right now, and it's Wood Reporting. And I will say my Twitter self is not my best self. I'm much nicer than I appear on Twitter, so I've got to go meditate on that. But it brings out the worst in us all, I think.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but sometimes Twitter does bring out the worst in people. So it is something to be aware of. But I don't think it brings out the worst in you all the time, Trish. I think your Twitter handle is fine. But thank you so much again for coming on the show. Thanks. It was amazing chatting with you today. I'm definitely going to ask you to come back on in the future. Yeah. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And as always, I'll be back again soon.